I hope that all of us are aware about the decision of the central government to conduct the census, which will now include the caste questions. After all, caste is just not an institution, it is also an ideology. And in that sense, it is a very powerful political ideology. And so, just for this discussion, I would request you to hide behind the veil of ignorance. The first thing that we have to address is a clear cut understanding and differentiation between Jati and caste. So, these regionally varying elements and the fluidity of the Jati system, whatever level fluidity it had, it froze for eternity by identifying the caste groups. Preferential treatment of scheduled caste became a fundamental part of India's social contract. But who are these other communities which will be extended the benefit of reservation or affirmative action? And that's when a term other backward caste comes into play. So the census had already been conducted in the British times. The administration enumerated caste along with religion, occupation. So why don't you go ahead and carve out your own unique OBC list, and to which the government in the affidavit in 2021 opposed releasing socio-economic caste census data to have some kind of inquiry related to caste statistics in the form of socio-economic caste census 2011. The first caste-based count in independent India. We have to count caste to discount caste. And so it will start a race to backwardness. From the perspective of PSIR, it is important for us to be well versed with the scholarly opinions. We know how fundamental it is to answer writing and understanding of the subject itself. Whenever we talk about caste, we have to give reference to Satish Deshpande, Christoph Jeffrelot, Yogendra Yadav, Mr. Jodhka. So just like religion-based majoritarianism is bad, caste-based majoritarianism is equally bad. By remaining invisible in the absence of data, the upper caste is able to perpetuate their wealth, their privileges in the society. Hello everyone. I hope that all of us are aware about the decision of the central government to conduct the census, which will now include the caste questions. Now, this has been a long-standing demand of opposition leaders, like Rahul Gandhi being the most prominent of them, and the central government just kept on ignoring, evading, or maybe delaying the decision to include the caste questions because probably it is a political battle. But now the central government has relented, maybe again because of the political reasons. But as a student of UPSC, and especially for PSIR optional, it becomes extremely important to have a holistic perspective around the caste census. And we are going to do exactly the same thing. But before I begin the discussion, my past teaching experience shows that out of all the classes that I have taken over years, the classes that happen to be extremely discursive, argumentative, and debateful have been the discussions around caste. After all, caste is just not an institution, it is also an ideology. And in that sense, it is a very powerful political ideology. And so just for this discussion, I would request you to hide behind the veil of ignorance. Try to switch off your caste realities, caste identities, because as soon as you are aware and associated by the caste, the likelihood of you appreciating the whole discussion goes down. So I don't know whether you belong to upper caste or lower caste or any caste that you belong to. The best churning can happen only when, for some time, you are unaware of your caste. So you can see why the Jati caste discourse matters for India's future, and lack of collection of data on caste is a blind spot on India's policy framework. But in order to be able to appreciate the whole discussion, the first thing that we have to address is a clear-cut understanding and differentiation between Jati and caste. My realization on the basis of interaction with the student shows, and even when I was a student, I used to use Jati and caste interchangeably with each other. So when we make references to caste, more often than not, we are trying to imply Jati and the other way vice versa, but they are not one and the same thing. Because Jati as a system is a part of Indian society as a social institution. All of us are aware of Jati, but some people say that people who are unaware of Jati, they generally belong to the upper caste. It was in fact the belief of Ambedkar that if you don't feel the Jati or the caste, probably you belong to upper caste. In order to feel Jati system, you have to belong to the lower caste. And that is of course true. So you can see that as a social institution, just like patriarchy as a social institution, religion as a social institution, caste system is based on organization of social groups, or Jati system is based on organization of social groups. The entire Indian society is divided into multiple jatis and subjatis with very strict rules regarding to social intercourse. The rules of endogamy, for example, rules related to marriage, rules related to eating habits, rule related to occupation and profession, and also all of that culminates into a hierarchical arrangement, a hierarchy of social groups, where people or the groups located higher up in hierarchy have extreme privileges, and people located towards the lower side of hierarchy just get the disprivileges out of caste system. So it is a hierarchy starting from privileges going up to disprivileges, and that is reflected in socio-economic outcomes of different social groups. Generally, the groups towards the top of the hierarchy are entitled with higher social capital, higher economic capital, and generally the jatis that are located towards the end of the spectrum, they generally have, and in most cases, they are deprived of most of the capital that the society has to offer. So in that sense, Jati system is a social institution. So far I have used Jati and caste interchangeably. So it is a social institution based on hierarchy and the concept of purity and pollution. People towards the top are considered to be pure, and hence they have higher status. People towards the end of the hierarchy, they have lower social status and more disprivileges. Many of these jatis have been extended a heinous form of untouchability, which is an integral part of caste system or Jati system in India. But this is the exhibition or understanding of Jati system in the form of social institution. But as a student of PSIR, you should also understand Jati system as a form of ideology. Just like any political ideology talks about the distribution of power in the society, Jati system also is increasingly concerned with and seriously concerned with the distribution of power in the society, and that's why the hierarchy is created. In fact, if you look at it, it can be rated as the most powerful ideology that has ever existed, that has allowed the upper caste to project themselves in power. It is a worldview. It weaves the worldview of Hindu society. So any person who is a follower of Hindu society, who is a resident among and within the Hindu society, weaves their entire worldview according to the Jati system. So you can see that it is also a very powerful political ideology. And one more aspect that you should be appreciative of is that it is an extremely traditional, or in that sense, medieval system, in the sense that it creates a closed society. Unlike the modern societies where the underlying feature is openness, allowing social mobility in between the social groups. So it's not like the social groups do not exist in West. But just like the medieval Western society where the mobility was not allowed in between the social groups, the caste system is a closed medieval architecture where the mobility is extremely difficult, although in some cases sociologists have analyzed the mobility, but in many cases, in most cases, it is impossible. So you can see that Jati system has exhibition or has the dimension of social institution, has a dimension of ideology, and it is in that sense very closed one. So this is what the Jati system is. But caste as a word, you can understand, is an English word. So the caste system is the Western understanding of India's Jati system. So when the Britishers first arrived in India and they established their rule in India, they understood that in order to be able to effectively rule the colonial people, it is extremely important to understand their society. And one of the important governing streams or threads which governs people even now and governed even more then is caste. So they started understanding caste in religion because they were the framework which basically led Indian people to take decisions. And when they started understanding India's Jati system, they drew reference to a very similar system that they had observed in West, which was rooted in race, which had rules related to marriage, which had rules related to interdining, which had rules related to occupation and profession. So in that sense, they confused India's Jati system with the caste, where the blocks are solidified and there is no scope of fluidity and rigidity. And they named India's Jati system as caste. And that was the fundamental mistake that happened in the course of Jati system, the solidification of the Jati system. Because their understanding revealed it to them that the entire Indian subcontinent, especially the Hindu society, is divided across 4 varnas or 4 caste groups. Mainly, now you know, the Brahmins, the Rajputs or Kshatriyas, I should use the word Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and Shudras. And when they started conducting the census after 1881, they included the questions on caste. And they forced all the jatis and subjatis to identify themselves as one of them, one of the 4. So the fundamental problem that happened as a result of this is that the Jati system had been an extremely regionally varying phenomena. The hierarchy of the Jatis and the subjatis was not the same. The Jats do not occupy the same status and hierarchy as they occupy in Haryana. It's not the same as they occupy in Western UP. It's not the same as they occupy in Rajasthan. But once you force them to identify, they would identify themselves as other backward castes. Somewhere they have high privileges, somewhere they have low privileges. In fact, the pyramid of hierarchy starting at Brahmins and then going to Kshatriyas and then going to Vaishyas and Shudras is also not the same in Indian subcontinent. For example, in South India, the hierarchy starts definitely at Brahmins, but there is no corresponding status or caste or jati of Kshatriyas in South India. So these regionally varying elements and the fluidity of the Jati system, whatever level fluidity it had, it froze for eternity by identifying the caste groups. Now there are both good and bad results, ramifications of this casteization of Jati. No one can deny that this was needed, especially for the depressed classes which belonged mainly to the Shudra group. And when the Indian nationalist movement was being led by the people, especially after Pune Pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar, preferential treatment of scheduled caste became a fundamental part of India's social contract. So it was clear that after independence, when the India will usher in the era of sovereignty and independence, India will write its own constitution. It was a given fact that it would see itself preferentially treating through affirmative action some of the jatis. And so if you look at the elements of some of the important provisions, but not all provisions of the Indian Constitution, you can clearly see it being articulated in Article 14, 15 and 16. Article 14, equality before the law, provided a very unique conception of equality, which talked about the equal protection of the laws. Unlike equality before the law, which is color blind vision of equality, affirmative action or equal protection of the laws is color sensitive treatment of equality. It allows the state to reasonably classify classes, to reasonably classify groups of the society and to treat them preferentially or differentially, both, as long as you are able to prove that your classification is reasonable. It should not be, so for example, it is because of the Article 14 that the government of India or government of the states are able to come up with welfare schemes. Progressive taxation is a result of Article 14, where people with higher income have to give higher taxes. This is a classification. So as long as you are able to create a intelligible differentia or a marker within the society which leads to the distinction of groups among themselves, which has a connection or a nexus with a justified state objective, that classification is valid. At the same time, there was an Article 15 which said that the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth. Article 14 allowed classification and preferential and differential treatment. But Article 15 said caste cannot be the basis of reasonable classification. And that's the whole case about Champakam Dorai Rajan, where reservation extended by the province of Madras before independence was struck down because it differentiated people on the basis of caste, where Supreme Court agreed that preferential treatment is allowed because of Article 14, but Article 15 clearly disallows some of the classification, which is any classification on the basis of religion, any classification on the basis of race, any classification on the basis of caste, place of birth and sex is absolutely disallowed. Go ahead and carve out different parameters to treat people preferentially, but we will not agree with your preferential treatment rooted in caste. And that's when the constitution had to be amended through first constitutional amendment. Of course, the primary reason was right to property had to be dealt in order to carry out land reform, but one of the important aspects of first constitutional amendment was insertion of clause 4 into Article 15, creating an enabling clause, not a right. Nothing in this article or in clause 2 of Article 29 shall prevent the state from making any special provision for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Three keywords: scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. So while scheduled caste and scheduled tribe would be objectively extended affirmative action, and if the state decides to go ahead, it would not be considered as violative of 15 clause 1. But the question always had been, who are these socially and educationally backward classes? Because the constitution has no answers. In fact, some of the people initially criticized as to why no reference to caste has been made. It could be socially and educationally backward castes, but it is socially and educationally backward classes of citizens, which basically meant that as long as you can identify a group which is both socially as well as educationally backward, you can preferentially treat them. Making no reference to caste, which means caste can be an indicator of social and educational backwardness, but caste cannot be the sole determinant of social and educational backwardness. So if the states want to go ahead and extend reservation to transgenders, that would not require any constitutional amendment. In fact, the state extended the benefit of reservation to physically disabled community without any constitutional requirement. The sole reason is that they are both socially and educationally backward. And here the reference to state means both the center as well as the state, both the parliament as well as the legislative assemblies of the state. Then you had Article 16, which said that equality of opportunity but restricted only to public employment. So in that sense, Article 15 is applicable, has a wider application because it takes care of all the state actions, whereas Article 16 has a very narrow application dealing only with the public employment. There shall be equality of opportunity for all citizens in matters relating to employment or appointment to any office under the state. Then clause 2 says that no discrimination on the basis of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, place of residence and descent. So 2 more basis gets added on in Article 16, but original constitution contained affirmative action within itself. Nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provision for the reservation of appointment or post in favor of, again, a different term. Backward class of citizens which in the opinion of the state is not adequately represented in the services under the state. So if the government had to extend reservation to any community beyond SCs and ST here, the government would have to objectively demonstrate that they are both socially as well as educationally backward. But if the government had to extend reservation in public employment beyond SC/ST, the government had to show that this community to which the reservation is now being extended is both backward class of the citizens, at the same time they are inadequately represented in the services of the state. So if the state government extends the reservation, they will have to quantify that because they are not represented, at the same time they are backward, we are extending reservation to them. So you can see that after the constitution came into existence, and especially 1 year after the first Constitutional Amendment Act was passed, the ground was paved to extend reservation to non-SC/ST backward class. Non-SC/ST and all those castes which are not SC/ST, because the reservation to SC/ST specifically is allowed by 15 clause 2 and 16 clause 4. 15 clause 4 and 16 clause 4. But who are these other communities which will be extended the benefit of reservation or affirmative action? And that's when a term, other backward caste, comes into play. The non-upper caste, non-SC/ST element of our Jati system, who are not clearly upper caste, so they do not have clear privileges, but they are not clearly the scheduled caste, and so they do not have 100% disprivileges. So all those intermediate castes who have a combination of privileges and the disprivileges arising out of caste system, it was clear that they would fit the designation of socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. Whereas in case of SC and ST, there was an Article 341 and 342 which clearly define what would SC and ST mean. And so you can see Article 341 clause 1 says, the president may, with respect to any state or union territory, and where it is a state, after consultation with the governor by public notification, specify the castes, races or tribes or parts of groups within castes, races or tribes which shall for the purposes of this constitution be deemed to be scheduled castes in relation to states, union territory, as the case may be. So you can see Article 341 clearly distinguishes between Jati and caste. The framing of the first clause of Article 351 clearly shows the awareness about the Jati system, because it says that the president will issue state-wise list of all the groups, jatis or sub-jatis, which will be identifiable as SC only for that state. So there is no nationwide designation of SC or ST. And so you can see that when the list was released, all the communities that you see on the page, they are scheduled caste, but only for the purpose of Andhra Pradesh. Even though these groups might exist beyond Andhra Pradesh, but you will have to see whether they have SC status in Tamil Nadu or not. That would be determined by the presidential order. So there is no confusion about what an SC is and what an ST is. But there had always been confusion about who these backward classes are, who these socially and educationally backward classes are, for the purpose of Article 15 and 16. And so in Article 340, in the original constitution, this was written, appointment of a commission to investigate the conditions of backward classes. The president may by order appoint a commission consisting of such persons as he thinks fit to investigate the conditions of socially and educationally backward classes within the territory of India and the difficulties under which they labor, and to make recommendations so as to the steps that should be taken by the union or any state to remove any difficulty and to improve their condition, and as to grants that should be made for the purpose of this union or state, and the conditions subject to such grant should be made, and the order appointing such commission shall define the procedure to be followed by the commission. A commission so appointed shall investigate the matters referred to them and present the president a report setting out the facts as found by them and making such recommendations as they think proper. President shall cause a copy of the report so presented together with memorandum explaining the action taken thereon to be laid before each house of the parliament. Clearly showing the need to have statistics around caste and jati in our country. So original constitution already contained a provision which would have mandated the central government to take steps, because in the lack of objective statistics and data, how will you carry out the functions of Article 340? So the census had already been conducted in the British times, and so the British administration enumerated caste along with religion, occupation every 10 years. So this is the colonial era. So every census, every 10 years since 1881, had a question related to the caste. So there was a updated data with the Britishers regarding the caste in India. But that is not Jati. In 1941 census, the caste question was excluded because of the World War and the massive expenditure that it would have required. So from 1981 until 1931, all the census had the question on caste. But in 1941, did not. Just after the independence, the first census of independent India in 1951 dropped the general caste question, recording caste only for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, because this was specifically mentioned in the constitution and it was required to give assured political representation. So original constitution contained the reservation for SCs and STs in legislative assemblies as well as in the Lok Sabha or the House of the People. Then in 1961, the central government permitted states to conduct their own surveys and prepare state-specific socially and educationally backward classes, which was now being replaced with other backward castes. So the central government denied the responsibility of identifying the national level OBC. But the union government took leverage of the language of Article 15 and 16, saying that nothing in this article shall prevent the state. The state means us and state also means you. So why don't you go ahead and carve out your own unique OBC list and prefer OBCs and give them preferential treatment in any way possible. We are not going to do it. So some of the states immediately started the reservation policies, some states did it later on. But the union government, the union institutions, the services of the union were untouched with the affirmative action of other backward castes. And that's when the Mandal Commission, second backward classes commission under Article 340 that we just read, was set up to prepare a report and to be submitted to the president, analyzing, scrutinizing the Indian society from the perspective of other backward castes. What is the socio-economic condition of all those backward castes who are not SCs and not STs? But when Mandal Commission started this, it faced a severe problem of lack of data, because the last data on caste that was available was of 1931. So it was a 50-year-old data. And we know that by that time researchers had shown how mobile or fluid the Jati system was as compared to the understanding of caste. But anyways, it had to submit its report. So it relied on that data and it submitted the data to the government, which became the basis of the government extending the 27% reservation to other backward castes. It was challenged in the Supreme Court under the landmark judgment of Indira Sahni, which, among many things, introduced the creamy layer to make the classification reasonable. And at the same time, it put an upper cap on reservation, caste-based reservation to 50%. And since then, this has been the norm until we had to extend reservation to economically weaker sections. After that, there was one initiative where the UPA government in 2011 was forced to have some kind of inquiry related to caste statistics in the form of socio-economic caste census 2011. The first caste-based count in independent India. It was not conducted, however, under the Census Act, which means that the responses were voluntary and the data could be used by the government programs, but the government could not be forced to make the data public. And that's when the legal battle started, where Supreme Court asked a clear-cut question as to why you are not releasing the caste data of socio-economic caste census, because half of the name is caste, socio-economic and caste census. To which the government in the affidavit in 2021 opposed releasing socio-economic caste census data. The SECC had serious accuracy issues and the basic integrity of the caste data may be compromised if used. The affidavit enumerated practical difficulties, inconsistent reporting of caste names, because people belonging to the same jati identify themselves and name themselves differently in different areas. So they could be performing the same role of blacksmith, but could identify themselves as Lohar in one area and Kamalars in Tamil Nadu. So do we consider that it is a different caste? How do we deal with this kind of problem? Due to synonymous Gotras regional variations, the challenge of verifying OBC status for certain respondents, orphans, intercaste persons, and the sheer number of caste responses beyond the official list. So the official list only has few hundred caste and jati designation. But when people started identifying themselves as one, we ended up with more than 3 lakh jatis in our country. So it is impossible to, with any kind of available technological tools, to segregate the Indian society into so many social groups. And that was the reason that the government revealed the main reason behind not making the data public. So you can see that the India's governance, the India's social and welfare programs are being driven by an extremely outdated 1931 census data, which was the last time when the Indian state asked questions around caste. So the most important factor which impacts Indians, the government does not have any data, and you can see so many programs hinge upon the understanding of caste in Indian society. We have issues related to representation, we have questions around welfareism, we have various questions, and so we have to count caste to discount caste. Policy implications of obtaining caste data. It is time that India refreshes its data related to socio-economic status of various jati and caste groups. And the reasons can be seen on the board, and it's just not one. There are many reasons as to why we should have the latest updated data. The number one, and probably the most important reason to update the caste data, deals with recalibrating affirmative action. Jiski jitni abadi uska utna hak is the main tagline of social justice in our country. Your proportional share in the state should be proportionate to your population in the society. But the ceiling has been put forward by the Supreme Court. If we get the latest updated data about the caste, who knows that the ceiling can be breached and the level of reservation provided can be increased, and then it will probably be understood as a justified claim of these communities. But recalibration is just not needed among the caste groups, they are also needed within the caste groups as well. As the demands for sub-categorization within OBC has clearly shown, Rohini Commission that was set up exactly to analyze the scope of sub-categorizing the communities within OBC. Where do you think the need arises? The need arises because of unreasonable classification of OBC. OBC caste groups or OBC Jati group is misclassification, because there are a lot of Jatis within OBC categorization which have entitlements very similar to upper caste. More privileges than disprivileges. At the same time, there are a lot of Jatis towards the lower spectrum which have socioeconomic indicators very relevant or very similar to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. So when you analyze the socioeconomic data of caste groups, might be a subcategorization is a natural corollary, and the debate and the argumentation ends and everyone starts understanding we need to create extremely backward, most backward and backward class categorization within OBC in order to make the reservation policies more reasonable. At the same time, for a very, very long period of time in Indian politics, the discourse has revolved around the presumed entitlement of certain families within SC/ST with respect to multi-generational impact of reservation. While anyone can make any demand, it should be backed by data. In the absence of data, how can anyone be sure about the relevance of these arguments? Maybe if we have a data, we will have a clear-cut picture about the actual impact that the caste-based reservation has done in scheduled caste and scheduled tribal Jati groups. But the answer can only be found once you have credible data. At the same time, the government of India and the state governments initiated a lot of targeted welfare and development programs like Manrega, National Food Security Act, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and various scholarship schemes go on for the vulnerable sections of the society. But in the absence of actual data talking about socioeconomic status of various groups, maybe we are mistargeting these policies. In order to target these policies in an effective fashion, we need the concrete real-time data. Who knows that there are a lot of deserving Jatis which have been excluded from the benefit, and who knows there are certain Jatis which do not deserve these benefits but they are getting because we have such an old data to target our policies. At the same time, it is important for India to make affirmative action policies dynamic rather than static. The concretization in the form of caste has made the benefit of the affirmative action frozen in time. So there is only entry but no exit policy. The data will reveal which are the communities which are no more socially and educationally backward and fit enough to be removed from the reservation category, and who knows that new Jatis emerge which are desirous. So in order to adjust for this dynamism, regional variation, fluidity, in order to account for that, you need the latest data to make the affirmative action policies more dynamic. At the same time, people often fail to think that the devolution of the fund to the states often hinges upon the welfare schemes and the burden of the schemes, especially with respect to the caste-based groups. Because the welfare schemes and the revenue sharing, generally in the central sponsored scheme of 60-40 between the center and the state respectively, has a consequence for the fiscal expenditure or fiscal burden both on the center and the state. When the new data will emerge, it will impact the fiscal federation of India, because maybe with the new data it will emerge that the states were being given less funds, in fact, and they had majority or they had more number of people belonging to the poor socioeconomic indicators. At the same time, states which were getting more fund had less socioeconomically poor section of the society, and so that kind of recalibration would obviously impact India's federation as well. At the same time, when caste is at the center of India's society, caste is also at the center of any kind of legal endeavor of the parliament and the state legislative assembly. In the absence of these data, the debates are just not well informed. In fact, they are ill informed. So in order to make the debates in the legislative assemblies more well informed, we need the new data. And obviously, as you will see in some time from now, for academic research and public knowledge, it is important for the Indian society to know about the caste realities. So these are the reasons because of which we have to count caste. Only then we will be in a situation to discount caste. Challenges and criticisms of conducting caste census. So from the perspective of UPSC, it is extremely important for us to be aware about the board dimension of any kind of problem or any kind of issue. So we have looked at some of the benefits that will yield as a result of the caste census. Let's quickly look at some of the problems that it might create, because of which the government has been extremely fearful of having the latest update about the caste in India. To begin with, there are some very objective operational and technical challenges. And the number one challenge happens to be the results of Socioeconomic Caste Census 2011, which highlighted that there were 4.6 million distinct caste entries in 2011. So 140, 125 crore people at that point of time identified themselves into 4.6 million, 46 lakh groups. And the problems are obviously there. We have discussed in this lecture itself. Barber can be identified as Nai and Hajam. They might or might not share the same privilege in the society. How will you align the Nai and Hajam who serve the same occupation but might have varying level of hierarchy? That's the problem. That there are so many regional variations that it is a mammoth statistical task to segregate so many castes into some kind of reasonable grouping in the society. So standardizing and classifying this data would be a colossal task. At the same time, unlike the British period, now you have affirmative action because the caste has become politicized. In that scenario, people know that the privileges that they get is because of the caste. And so there is a huge scope of people deliberately and intentionally misidentifying themselves, knowing fully well that such misidentification will enable them a few benefits from the state. So when everyone is aware about the preferential treatment by the state to some communities, if you are situated in adjacent Jati community, you would like to identify yourself as a poor, and so it will start a race to backwardness. And there is no objective legal mechanism to disprove otherwise. If people identify themselves as a caste or a Jati, it is very difficult not to or deny them such recognition. Then obviously people have speculated that it is going to entrench or deepen the caste identities. It is going to solidify the caste identities even further. And that is why I started with the discussion as caste in stone. By doing this, probably we are going to solidify the caste in perpetuity. So instead of reducing caste importance in public life, it will strengthen it. And obviously, it is going to create problems for dominant caste and upper caste, both of the community constituting the minority section of Indian society, but amassing disproportionate privileges from the state and the society. And it is going to dent their privileges by a huge margin. Registering caste will weaken efforts of social harmony. Casteless society is the goal. Casteless society is the aim and objective. But if you compare it with reality, then counting caste might go against the idea of creating a casteless society, because we are going to make people aware. We are going to make people more aware about their caste realities. Then obviously it's going to face some legal and administrative hurdles for sure, because litigations about the accuracy of the data itself, and it is for sure that people are going to challenge the outcome of this decision, contesting the classification and the basis of data fidelity. At the same time, now that privacy has become a part of Article 21, it is going to create problems around privacy and social sensitivity. So I hope that the issues and challenges with respect to or associated with the exercise of conducting caste census is clear. This has to be a smaller video, not a class lecture. So obviously the detailed analysis will be done. But I think this will be more than sufficient from the perspective of general studies. However, from the perspective of PSIR, it is important for us to be well versed with the scholarly opinions. We know how fundamental it is to answer writing and understanding of the subject itself. Whenever we talk about caste, we have to give reference to Satish Deshpande, Christoph Jeffrelot, Yogendra Yadav, Mr. Jotka, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, Suhas Palshikar. So I have collected the commentaries of these scholars with respect to the socio-economic caste census or caste-based census. Start with Satish Deshpande, who is outright supporter of the caste-based census. Because according to him, the privileges in the Indian society have been largely amassed by the upper caste. But because we do not have any caste-based data, it is extremely difficult to prove factually their privileges. And according to him, it is the minuscule minority upper caste and dominant caste of the society which have delayed the caste-based census. Because as soon as you will have data, it will give away the privilege, remove the invisibility, which is the power as of now. By remaining invisible in the absence of data, the upper caste is able to perpetuate their wealth, their privileges in the society. At the same time, you have Christoph Jeffrelot, who says that India is operating in a paradoxical situation, where caste-conscious compensatory discrimination regime, affirmative action or preferential treatment on the basis of caste is operating in the absence of caste data, caste-blind environment. So he says that it is such a funny paradox that most of the policies of the governments across the country, they are rooted in caste, but there is no caste data. So you can imagine the paradox. So both these people are unequivocal supporters of the caste-based census, along with Yogendra Yadav, who says that the caste-based census is key to unmasking the privileges of the dominant groups, going along the same direction as Mr. Satish Deshpande. But at the same time, he says that there are more benefits going away from upper caste. So for a very long time, the effort has been to subcategorize the OBCs to make the classification more reasonable. Equal treatment of equally situated. When we will have concrete statistical data about caste and their socioeconomic profile, it will be so easy for us to maybe first understand whether we need the subcategorization, and if the answer is yes, how to go about it. And answering to the critiques pointing out that the caste economic census, that caste-based census is going to create strifes in the society, he says that the census data in India already collect data on religion and language. Every census has asked questions about religion and language. So if that has not resulted into social fracture, destruction of social fabric, what leads you to believe that one more identity-based question is going to destroy the India's social fabric? Then you have Surendra Jotka, who is a little bit neutral about the caste-based census. He supports caste-based census. He cannot go against it. But at the same time, he points out the futility of conducting the union-led, the central government-led exercise because of the regionally varying characteristic of Jati. Now you understand that. So according to him, reality of caste is highly localized and fluid. So data gathering should be extensive and perhaps decentralized. He supports caste-based collection but suggests that state-level caste surveys may be more practical given that caste formations are regional in character. So because Jati system is regionally varying phenomena, the efforts to count the caste should be led by the state initiatives, not by the central government. And then finally, you have critiques of the caste-based census. Critique not in the sense that they do not want the data to be refreshed, but critique in the sense that the prominence that is given to the caste-based census. In mirage of social justice, Pratap Bhanu Mehta sees resurgence revival of Mandal style politics, exemplified by the same common slogan, Jitni Abadi Utna Hak, because it completely is focused on number games. Proportion in the population, proportion in the state public employment is the only focus. And as soon as this gets prioritized, it ignores other and more substantial issues, deeper issues related to public services education. So he argues that deeper solutions like quality education, better public service, economic opportunities do not require caste data, it is for everyone to use. And he also speculates, something that I have not included in slide, he can see the same trend of majoritarian politics, because as soon as the caste data will reveal the real population of OBCs, it might turn into a majoritarian politics. So just like religion-based majoritarianism is bad, caste-based majoritarianism is equally bad. And then he goes on to say that the parties that focus on caste-based politics have a very poor record of delivering the good governance, the public goods. And along the same line, Suhas Palshikar is of the opinion that counting caste will be a pseudo-radical gesture unless coupled with fundamental shift in the social justice policy. Counting caste could strengthen their importance in public life rather than reduce it. So you can see that the scholars are divided. More number of scholars are in favor of recording the latest caste-based statistics as a means, but it in itself should not become an end. Because as soon as you make it an end, you ignore other important substantive issues related to governance. So that brings us to the end of the discussion. I hope this discussion must have been fruitful for you. It's not a waste of time, I hope. If you liked the video, please let us know through the comments and likes that you like the video, so that we are also motivated to come up with these kinds of initiatives. Thank you.